Hi guys, welcome back to The Social Tune, and today we're going to be taking a look at the third studio album by Father John Misty, aka Josh Tillman, Pure Comedy.
Comedy, now that's what I call pure comedy. Just wait until the part where they start to believe they're at the center of everything, and some all-powerful being endowed this horror show with meaning.
This has been my most anticipated album of the year. I've been excited for a few of the albums that I've reviewed thus far this year, but not as much as this one. For those of you who still don't know, Father John Misty is responsible for creating one of the very few albums that I would consider to be perfect, I Love You, Honey Bear, which topped my list of the best albums of 2015 and remains an album I adore to this day. There are a number of artists who I like as much as this guy, but very few that I respect as much. By the way, fun fact, he used to be the drummer in the critically beloved indie folk band Fleet Foxes. Not many people seem to know that. But anyway, did I expect Pure Comedy to be better than I Love You, Honey Bear? No. That album was a stroke of pure genius that very few have ever reached, and to date, no one has ever reached more than once, at least not in my opinion. But I still thought that this would be fantastic, and the lead-off singles gave me every reason to be hopeful. Plus, even critics who didn't enjoy this were all giving arguments that made me even more excited for this release, because after all, what doesn't work for one person may work for another and vice versa. So how did it turn out? Well, honestly, while this album isn't perfect, it's within spitting distance of it. I expected this to be great, but it turned out to be so good that I seriously considered giving it a perfect score. And while it may just fall short, it's still easily one of the best projects that I've ever heard, and will easily turn out to be one of my favorite albums of the year. So let's start things off with the production.
Now mostly spend the long days walking through the city, empty as a tomb. Sometimes I miss the top of the food chain, but what a perfect afternoon.
Now, one of the best things about I Love You, Honey Bear is that the instrumentation is incredibly lush, making every single song feel gigantic. And thankfully, this album builds on that, as Father John Misty brought in an entire orchestra to back him up on this album. Heck, if anything, the instrumentation on this album is even grander, with some truly incredible moments. From the crescendo of horns on the piano-driven title track and Things It Would Have Been Helpful to Know Before the Revolution, to the echoing percussion and faint string touches on two wildly different perspectives, not to mention the piano and xylophone/glockenspiel touches on that track, to the simple piano lines and gospel touches on When the God of Love Returns There'll Be Hell to Pay and the Memo. And then of course you have the simpler tracks like the flat-out gorgeous drums, pedal steel, guitars and pianos on Smoochie, or the acoustic guitar on drums on the jaunty, piano-driven Ballad of the Dying Man. Not to mention the gospel crescendo near the end, finishing on Josh Tillman's quivering vibrato. Or take the minimalism of Birdie, or the fantastic strings on the 13-minute tour de force Leaving LA. And then you have the simpler compositions with a verse-chorus structure on A Bigger Paper Bag, which felt like an honest-to-God Beatles song. It was that good. And while so many of these songs are grand, opulent, 5-minute plus compositions, there's something really wonderful about the jovial crescendo of pianos and horns on Total Entertainment Forever. It really does live up to its name. Honestly, the production is so lush and so gorgeous that I really have no complaints. The compositions and orchestration on this album are just that good, and every aspect of the orchestra deserves credit, from the strings to the percussion to the horns. If I had to nitpick, I would say that some of these songs do take their time ending, but that's a very minor gripe, and they're still great to listen to. And even then, the atmospheres that those drawn-out instrumental endings can create can be so powerful, especially at the end of I'm Growing Old on Magic Mountain, where you really do feel the lament of an older man feeling like he's just preaching to young, unlistening ears. And one of the big reasons that all of this sounds so great is Josh Tillman himself.
Either way, we make some space in the hell that we create on both sides.
Now don't get me wrong, this guy has always sounded great, but on this album he's going for so many different emotions that it really does challenge his range. He really does make more use of his falsetto on this album, and it gave me a new appreciation for that side of his vocal range. And when he's not doing that, he sticks in his mid-range, which is also fantastic, and the way he slips from one into the other so effortlessly is really damn impressive. He apparently gave up drugs, drinking, and a number of other things while making this album because of his state of mind, and it really does show in the best way possible. And plus, I have to give major props to the gospel choir backing him up here. They really do a fantastic job. But hey, you should all know that by now. What you guys want me to talk about are the lyrics and content on this album.
Naturally the dying man wonders to himself, his commentary been more lucid than anybody else.
Okay, so on his last album, Father John Misty sketched out an untampered view of a relationship from the point of view of our protagonist getting his shit together and maturing slowly but surely, despite being a complete idiot. So ultimately, it was pretty straightforward and easy to follow. Hell, that's what made it so accessible to so many people. This album is so intricate and tackles so many things in its hour-plus runtime that I can kind of see why so many people have called it pretentious and drawn out. However, I would respectfully disagree, because when you take a step back and look at this album through a certain lens, it's almost childishly simple. The first thing to note is that this is all based on Josh Tillman's opinion and is undeniably influenced by his own upbringing, so there are bound to be a few things that you will disagree with. And if I'm being honest and totally transparent, mine is his struggle with religion, as he calls out the God of the New Testament and frequently calls the world godless. Now, before my devout religious viewers boycott this album for this, please note two things. One, he clearly believes in God, at least in some romantic or metaphysical sense. So when he calls the world godless on things it would have been helpful to know before the revolution, he's referring to the fact that God doesn't play as big a role in today's society. He just isn't a factor in the way he used to be. And two, again, this is all based on his opinion. He grew up with Pentecostal parents and in an evangelical school. You can kind of see why he'd feel oppressed in that environment. But how would I sum up this album's theme? Well, if I had to boil it down, it would be that the differences between us and our fellow men are laughably non-existent, and that we're all a lot more similar than we'd care to admit. He tackles this directly on two wildly different perspectives, and then again indirectly on a lot of these songs, including the narcissism on A Bigger Paper Bag and The Ballad of the Dying Man. And he's careful to point out that he's not preaching, he's just as guilty of this as any of us, as he points out on So I'm Growing Old on Magic Mountain, Leaving LA, and The Memo. The last of which also tears into the marketing of sports, visual art, and musicians. And he also takes stabs at our culture, not just the internet side or the social media side, but at our entertainment-obsessed society as a whole on Total Entertainment Forever. It's the simple message of technology equals progress suddenly shown in a very disturbing light, as the song closes on a morbid image of a skeleton plugged into a machine with a dead, frozen smile on its face. Really, and I'm directing this at liberals here, the reason that Trump became president is because we found it entertaining, and now we entertained him for too long and we're stuck facing the consequences. And as if in answer to that song, you have things it would have been helpful to know before the revolution, which has humanity actually doing something about global warming and going back to their caveman origins, only for the song to show how quickly humanity regrets its decision to help the environment because it's too hard, but also how quickly they'll revert back to the pleasurable distractions that technology has to offer. Or, as he puts on Pure Comedy, the only thing that seems to make them feel alive is the struggle to survive. But the only thing that they request is something to numb the pain with, until there's nothing human left. And boy, is that just the beginning, or technically the end, of that track. As it dives into the comedy of life in how A, we're all born here with absolutely no idea what we're doing, hoping that someone else will tell us, unlike pretty much every other animal out there, and yet we somehow still feel superior to them, and B, the fact that we're the ones who try to constantly put up obstacles to separate ourselves from those around us. when in reality, rich or poor, black or white, terrorist or victim, dictator or peasant, we're all born equally human. And at the end of that track, he states, each other's all we got. We're unable to survive on our own. Hell, without others, we don't have a reason to exist. Simply because that's how nature has wired us. That's pretty damn heavy.
Betting Taylor Swift every night inside the Oculus Rift. After Mr. and the Mrs. finish dinner and the dishes.
And yet, while this may sound extremely pretentious to a lot of you, Josh's own humanity does shine through on songs like Smoochie, which is the song devoted to his loving, supportive wife, So I'm Growing Old on Magic Mountain, and especially the closing track, In 20 Years or So, which starts out pretty nihilistically with him shouting out, what's the point in all of this considering how pointless and inconsequential we all are, before fading into the image of him just talking to his friend at a bar with their second drinks on the way, and Talking Heads' This Must Be the Place being played on the piano in the background, as he comes to a conclusion, the same one that the classic album Southern Family that dropped last year came to, namely, everything will be alright in the end. Even with the knowledge that humanity may collapse in the next 20 years, Josh Tillman is just going to sit back and enjoy the ride, because in the end, there really is nothing to fear. So basically, this album is incredible, and it is bound to go down as a classic. I know that some people have not responded well to this album, and I'm not going to say it's because you don't get it. Even Josh Tillman himself has pointed out that a lot of people will just see this as preachy and overindulgent and overly long. But for me, this album entertained the hell out of me, and it really did give me a lot to think about. Not to mention some absolutely incredible music to help me along the way. So, it should go without saying, extremely strong 9 out of 10, and I'm urging all of you guys to check this out no matter how you feel about the artist and no matter who you are. Because, as stated on the record, the differences between us, they don't matter in the end, and we could all use a little bit more of this in our lives. And as for Josh Tillman, you will probably never see this, but on the off chance that you do, thank you once again for making some of my favorite music of all time. So, thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tune, signing off.